Let's continue on the diet history method. So diet history was developed by Burke in 1947 to estimate individuals' usual food intake over an extended period of time in the past week, month, or year. So this is actually must be carried out by trained interviewer. Okay, because similar to 24-hour diet recall, you must need some training to conduct this method. So the original method involved collect general information about respondents' health, habits, appetite, food dislike, nausea, vomiting, use of nutritional supplements, smoking, and exercise. And questions on respondents about his or her usual eating pattern. And then we cross-check what we have just asked about their eating pattern. And the respondents complete a 3-day food record. Mostly, this step is mostly omitted by the researcher because it's very unhelpful to have two types of dietary methods in a study. So basically, we just ask the diet history similar to 24-hour diet record, but this is over a longer period of time. The time frame is longer, so we'll go and ask what they usually consume for breakfast, and then the respondents will actually explain that they usually consume nasi lemak, or if they couldn't find nasi lemak, they'll just buy curry puff and another two kuehs for breakfast. Or if they are in a hurry, they will just take bread toast with butter and jam, things like that. Okay, so it's similar to 24-hour diet recall, but it will have some options of the foods. So I think in clinical practice, you usually use diet history more compared to 24-hour diet recall, because you can also gauge information on the appetite and also food-related symptoms and supplements used throughout the section. So some researcher might need another method on top of diet history just to complement the diet history. Example, a 3-day food record. After they have completed the diet history in person with the respondent, they ask the respondents to complete another 3-day food record just to see the consistencies between diet history and also the food record. But most of the time, the researcher will omit this step because it will be very burdensome to have two types of dietary measurement in a study. Okay. So the strength and limitation of diet history is, the strength is it can assess usual nutrient intake, can detect seasonal change. Sometimes it's musim buah, there will be a lot of rambutans in the diet. It's musim durian, a lot of durian in the diet. Or maybe musim tengkujuh in East Coast, rainy season, monsoon season, there will be less fish and seafood in the diet. So that history can actually detect seasonal changes. So data on all nutrients can be obtained after you analyze, of course, and this can be correlated well with biochemical measures, which is being conducted in clinical setting. The limitation will be the interview process. You will be able to imagine it will be very lengthy because we are asking a lot of questions related to their food habits. It requires highly trained interviewers and labor intensive. The result depends on the skill of the interviewer to sort of probe questions and record the responses. Difficult and expensive to code because of the mixture of various type of foods being consumed, and may tend to overestimate nutrient intake. Okay, because similar to FFQ, when you have a lot of food items being reported, people tend to overestimate. and requires cooperative from the respondent with the ability to recall usual diet. So sometimes in clinical settings, we do not use food softwares to calculate or estimate the nutrient intake. We have our food exchange method, which we have memorized the calories and serving size, so we can actually just quickly estimate based on the diet history. So the next method is duplicate food collection. So duplicate food collection is when participants place in collection containers identical portion of all foods and beverages consumed during a specified period. So then the samples will be chemically analyzed at the level 3 for nutrient content. And of course, when we store foods for a longer time, there will be bacterial decomposition of the samples. Therefore, we must refrigerate the samples which are being delivered to the level 3 daily. So this is basically, we ask the respondents to duplicate their diet. Let's say we have identified you must sample all your foods on 5th of November, which is tomorrow. So the researcher will give them containers for them to collect samples. But samples, what do I mean by sample is not a small portion of the food they eat, but the actual portion. Example, if they consume 2 slices of roti canai, 2 keping roti canai, so they have to keep aside or put in the container 2 slices of roti canai. Okay, so if they take 1 bungkus of nasi lemak, so they have to buy another bungkus and put it in the collection containers. So that is what we call duplicate food collection. So we duplicate whatever being consumed. Okay, the strength is it provides more accurate measurement of actual nutrient intake than calculation based on or calculation or estimation based on food composition table. So when we collect food frequency questionnaire or diet recall or diet records, when we are converting it into nutrient, we use food composition table. But in duplicate food collection, we actually analyze the nutrient in the lab. So we will get the actual amount of fat gram in the diet, the protein gram in the diet, and the vitamins, minerals, and so on. But the limitation is the expense and effort of preparing more food. So if they have to buy, then the researcher must provide some money to them, some allocation for them to duplicate the food collection. But if they sample foods that being cooked at home, so they have to prepare more food than usual because they have to put aside a portion, identical portion in the containers for the researcher. Therefore, time to collect duplicate samples is also will be a limitation for this method, and this may underestimate usual intake. So if they are like jimat, they want to save money from sampling the food, so or all the food they consume is finished by themselves without being able to be duplicated. Example, like they bought a bag of chips and then they finish everything themselves, then there's nothing else to duplicate. So this may underestimate the usual intake. So the next method is photographic. This is the final method, I think, the photographic or video records. So because nowadays we have a lot of technologies and innovations in dietary assessment techniques. So the one that we usually see in research is photographic or video records. So this is developed in an attempt to reduce respondent burden of recording their food and increase the validity of dietary intake data. So instead of they have to fill up a form record or they have to weigh the food, they can just take photos of their food that they would like to consume, because taking pictures of food is very common nowadays, because we tend to upload it into our social media what we consume. But for research purpose, it's an obligation to actually record all the foods, no matter how beautiful the food or not that beautiful the image that you take. Is the instruction is to photograph all the foods that they consume, and participant must photograph all their food before eating, which will look nice, and after eating, there is what was left after eating on their plate that will look gross sometimes. So estimates were made on each food. Known food portion are used to help in estimating portion sizes. So the estimation is being done by the researcher. And when using video records, results obtained independently by two observers identified two food items in the same set of videotape means, and these are being compared. So usually when we record it using videos, sometimes the researcher tend to miss some of the components. So we need another person, another observer, to re-evaluate the video and compare what they have managed to harvest from the video, the information that they have harvested from the video. The strength and limitation of these methods the strength is photographic method has a very good validity in studies reported. Video method has also good validity and reproducibility. And recording food intake takes less time than 24-hour food records or food records, because you just have to take up the camera and click to take the picture. Respondent burden is less because they enjoy taking picture of their meals. Appear to be acceptable to subjects nowadays, and eating habit may be less affected by recording, and well suited for institutional setting and disabled person when they are not able to record themselves. So photographic method, we can use our own handphone, or we can use other types of method, like there's a button camera clicked on your shirt. So every time you want to start your meal, you can on the video. Or there is also another method where the camera is always on, but you can off it when you are going to the restroom. So any foods that you consume in between will be recorded. Without you noticing them. So sometimes we take tidbits, chocolates that we tend to omit from that we call our food records, that will be recorded by the photographic method or video records, which have been placed like a button on your shirt. But there is some limitation for this method. There will be a large initial expense involved when doing this, because we have to develop softwares. If you want a mechanism for the pictures to be sent directly or in real time to the researcher, this may be offset by lower long-term costs. Actually, in long term, it will be very useful, but the initial expense will be very large. There will be periodic revalidation, which is recommended. So you must always do validation for this method, because sometimes respondents are very semangat on the earliest session, but throughout the weeks or throughout the months, they get like demotivated to continue taking pictures of the food. So there must be some validation being done periodically. So another limitation is unable to visually distinguish visually similar foods or document preparation methods. Sometimes the video is not clear. So, like an example there in the picture there, it's not very clear what is the brown thingy is. It might be chicken, or it might be a beef maybe. Okay, so it is not clear. Okay, so so it depends to the researcher to identify what is the food actually. So there is also some methods that the respondents can actually label each food on their camera. So you can label that's mashed potato, that's salad, and then what's another one? We are not sure. So another limitation is subject to technical problem caused by sophisticated equipment. So this is a world problem. So example, a real example just now when we wanted to start our session, there's some technical problems. So whenever there's technical problems, there will be some loss of data. Okay. So another picture down here is it's like a camera being put around your cheeks, so that every food that enter your mouth, it's being recorded. So there will be Bluetooth electronics that will be connected to your mobile phone, and then there are also some chewing sensor on the jaw. So every time you open the mouth, the camera over there will click to take picture. So it's not taking picture every time. So only when your jaw is moving. So this is things that being developed, being prototyped at various institutions to increase the validity and accuracy of dietary reporting methods. Okay. So throughout the few methods that we have explored just now, we can see that there are several modes of dietary interview that can be conducted. So sometimes interview can be conducted face-to-face, and sometimes through telephone interview. We can also use computerized techniques when we are doing interview with the respondents, where we have instruction and recording is on the computer, not on a paper. And we can also use surrogate sources. So I've explained what is surrogate earlier. We can also use surrogate sources to conduct the interview. So there are various modes of interview that's emerging, and the field keeps expanding along with technology development. Okay. So the first mode is by telephone interview, where telephone interview is becoming accepted and widely used method for collecting dietary intake data. So it's used to administer 24-hour recalls and also FFQ, particularly to follow up on a face-to-face interview. So example, like you have 7 days 24-hour diet recall, so maybe 5 days can be conducted through telephone interview. The first one is conducted face-to-face, and the final one is also conducted face-to-face. So, and maybe you need to repeat an FFQ. So the first one is conducted face-to-face, where they are trained to answer, and the second FFQ is conducted through telephone interview. So recalls collected via telephone interview showed good agreement with observed intake in various age group. So this is based on studies, and the strengths are 1/4 to 1/2 of the cost of comparable personal interview is being reduced. And there is also fewer time, logistical and personal constraint, because you don't need to actually travel to meet the participant, and you don't need to set an appointment, you just have to call them. Lower respondent burden, they also don't need to travel to meet you. Higher response rate compared to mail service. So mail service is very interesting in Malaysia. In overseas, usually when people get mail service, they 90% or 80% will actually respond back by answering the mail survey. They will take the trouble to go to the post office and post it. But that is not true in Malaysian setting, where some studies have tried mail survey and only 20% responded or actually completed the survey and posted it back to the researcher. So it depends on the culture of the population. This gives telephone interview also gives respondents more personal security, so they don't need to go out and meet somebody that they don't know, and give information to people that they don't know, a stranger. So it gives the personal security aspect more when when we do telephone interview. But there is of course some limitation where subject to many of the same disadvantages of collecting 24-hour net record and food record, because it's still an interview, and estimating portion sizes in records, especially in telephone interview, might be difficult because you cannot actually see or show the models, or show the sendok, cawan, pinggan, and so on. But if you have taken some steps to address the problem by providing them the figures during your first visit, or give a guide of portion size to them, then it will be not a limitation in telephone interview. Okay. The next mode is computerized technique. This is quite new in Malaysia. In the past few years, there have been studies being using computerized techniques. This is developed to reduce respondent burden and increase validity of dietary intake data, and it improves cost effectiveness. So imagine you have a paper-based FFQ and you have a computerized FFQ. It will be very much easier to the respondent to actually respond to a computerized technique, because the question and the way the question is being asked, the way we can give more information on the portion size and photographs, it will be much easier for the respondents to respond to our FFQ. That's an example. Another example will be when we use weight food record, the first picture on the bottom. The weighing scale is actually connected to a computer with nutrient analysis software. So every time you weigh the food on the weighing scale, the data will be transferred to the computer, where you have to input what is the type of food being measured, and immediately the nutrient will be calculated for you and for the respondent, and you don't need to do data entering and so on. So you can also use dietary assessment with 3D scanning. This is also a new method where we just have a probe to scan all the foods that we consume, and it will be recorded into our software. Okay, so there are various computerized techniques out there, including in Malaysia. So maybe if you explore, you get some examples of what being done. And finally, the mode is by using surrogate measures. So this is when the respondent is not able to provide intake data that the investigators desire, because they are disabled, because they are in elderly or having speech hearing problem. The potential surrogate source will be their spouse or their partner, their children if it's elderly, and close relatives and friends, especially those who eats together and live together. Okay, and when using surrogate measures, we must anticipate incomplete responses, because not every time or every moment the surrogate is with the respondent. Sometimes when we measure among children, the parents might not know what the child ate at the school or at their TASCA or TADICA. So incomplete responses must be anticipated. Availability of data varies with the surrogate's relationship to the participants, the surrogate gender, and the number of shared meal. So if you are closer, living together with the respondent, the surrogate is living together with the respondents, then the data availability will be higher. And mostly when the surrogate is female, they are more able to answer what their partners have been consuming, especially when it is for the children. The mother knows what the child have been consuming compared to the father, because the father goes to work and then things like that. And the number of shared meal. So if you eat together, the surrogate tend to know more of what the person have been eating. So obtaining information from surrogate sources may improve information quality and provide data otherwise unavailable from incompetent participants. So that must be anticipated. So any questions so far? We are on the last section of the lecture. That is consideration for special group. Any questions? No? Okay, then we will continue. In assessing dietary intake, there must be some consideration for special groups, which I've listed here, but only this group. So a younger person, those with recall problem, those with impaired vision or hearing, those illiterate, and people living with obesity are considered special group in dietary assessment. We will explore one by one. So a younger person, when we measure the dietary intake of children less than 8 years old, which is darjah 2 and below, the best is to obtain the data from person responsible for the meal. So surrogate method is the best method. Those who prepare the meals for these kids. For food taken away from home, we must interview children in the presence of the parent or guardian. We can also interview the children, especially for foods that they buy at their school canteen. Okay, so we can interview them, the children themselves, but the parent or guardian must be present during the interview session, so that we don't get ridiculous answers from the children. So the reliable of data of intake in previous 24 hours can be obtained from children more than 8 years old. So if your study is among children darjah 2 and above, you can actually interview them, because they already know how to communicate with the person. They know how to respond to questions well. So 8 years and above is considered not a special group lah. So you can actually collect data directly from them. So the next group is persons with recall problems. So this is mostly elderly and those with special needs. Okay, so there is no firm evidence that memory of the past diet is impaired during aging, unless we can prove that using methods to look at the cognitive level and so on. So the ability to recall past diet may be of a function of how much attention is paid on what is eaten. So like I've explained earlier, some people are not aware of what they have consumed in the past day because the food is being prepared for them. They just it's a routine. Yeah, they come back from work, the food is prepared for them, and then they go to do their other activities. So they are not able to actually recall because they have not put much attention to what is being served or what is being eaten. So with this group of people, a checklist and visual aids may help. So I know in clinical settings, we use a lot of checklists, especially when we want to gauge information on sodium, fat, certain type of nutrients that's concerned among the patient. So we use checklists so that the respondent would not looper or forget to recall the foods. Okay, you can also use visual aids like pictures of foods, which might help them recall their diet. So information obtained from surrogate can also improve the quality of data among person with recall problem. So among person with impaired vision or hearing, so those with visually impaired, we must use a large screen materials. So this is those who are not actually blind, totally blind lah. Yeah? If they are totally blind, then if you use any size of print material pun mereka tak nampak. So if they are just impaired, they have problems. So we use large print materials. We can also use tape recordings, radio, a telephone for the interview, personal interview, and we can use braille is letters for those who are blind. Okay, they can understand braille. So for those who have hearing impaired, self-explanatory and well-prepared printing materials and or user with an interpreter of sign language and visual aids might help this group of respondents. So the instruction must be clear because they cannot hear you to explain or they cannot hear your instruction. So they can only read the instruction. So the instruction must be self-explanatory and well prepared. You can also use interpreter using sign language, okay, and also visual aids to collect data. So verbal responses to an interviewer can facilitate data collection. So if they have problems to actually communicate, so that will be a big problem for us to get the data from this group of patients. Other special groups will be illiterate person who cannot read. So of course, when the person cannot read, then immediately the only resort that we have is to do a personal interview using tape recorders, printed materials with appropriate vocabulary, or food models and photographs. Sometimes it's just printed materials with pictures to reduce the gap of communication between an illiterate person and yourself. So for people living with obesity, there is some problem of tendency to underreport energy intake using diet history and food record because they are shy, they are afraid that they did not comply to the previous counseling session. So this is must be anticipated from this group of people living with obesity. Okay. So that's all for this time. So if you have any question or discuss anything regarding today's material, you are